This is Journey Through Persia, a treasure trove of memories, Episode 3 written by Abdulmalik Hashmi and read by Sonia. Journey Through Persia, a treasure trove of memories. Episode 3. Iranian Visa and Other Perils of Travel. The very moment I set my mind on traveling to Iran, a whole caravan of worries hitched itself to my thoughts like uninvited baggage. Chief among them was the nagging fear that if an Iranian visa so much as grazed my passport, all my hopes of ever stepping foot on American soil would crumble like a poorly built sandcastle. Now, this wasn't just some idle fretting, no sir, it had a solid foundation. Back in 2015, the US government put out a decree that any European traveler with a passport stained by a visit to Iran, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Libya, or Somalia wouldn't be allowed past the front gate. But the Iranians, clever as ever, weren't about to let that little snag spoil their grand tourist business. They figured out a way to hand out visas on a separate slip of paper, leaving passports as clean as a preacher's Sunday suit. This way, foreign travelers, their pockets jingling with good, honest dollars, could stroll through the bazaars of Tehran, admire the mosques of Isfahan, and get lost in the poetry of Shiraz, all without a care in the world. These days, they call it an e-visa, but back then, it felt more like a magician's trick. It was July of 2001 when I set out for Iran. The excitement of the journey was enough to make any man forget his troubles, but I had a gnawing little voice in my head that just wouldn't hush up. You see, relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran were as warm as a rattlesnake in a frying pan. Neither side was willing to budge, and I couldn't shake the feeling that, on my return, some customs officer at the Saudi airport might take one look at my passport and decide to make my life miserable just for the fun of it. By the time September 2001 rolled around and the world turned upside down with the attack on the Twin Towers, I had already made my way back from Iran. At the Saudi airport, the moment the officer laid eyes on my passport, my heart started pounding like a steam engine on a steep climb. I took to whispering prayers, hoping for the best. And then, just like that, his stamp came down with a dull thud. It felt like being let out of a dark, tangled forest straight into the bright, open fields. I took a deep breath, straightened my coat, and stepped back onto Saudi soil, none the worse for wear. But that was another time, another world. The swords have been put away, the quarrels have mellowed, and what once seemed like an insurmountable hurdle is now just a dusty old story, fit for telling over a slow evening by the fire. Reaching Iran, the good old way. Now, there are 3 ways to get yourself to Iran: by train, by bus, or by flying through the sky like some kind of high-faulting aristocrat. But let me tell you, my friend, if you've never taken a long, meandering train ride through foreign lands, you ain't truly traveled yet. By train, the right way to wander. See, a train journey ain't just about getting from one place to another. No sir, it's a whole different breed of adventure. It's like stepping into an old yarn spun by some grizzled storyteller by the fireside. It's like finding a letter in the attic from some long-gone relative, full of secrets you can almost, but not quite understand. It's like hitching a ride with a ghost, except the ghost is made of iron and rattles along on steel tracks. The minute you hear that distant whistle wail, you know something's afoot. The train comes rolling in, slow and steady, like an old hound dog stretching after a long nap. Then the doors swing open, and the cool night air rushes in like it's got some urgent business with your soul. You find your seat, settle in, and before long, the wheels start their steady clatter, clickety-clack, like the ticking of a great cosmic clock, dragging you forward into the unknown. Now, there's something mighty peculiar about staring out a train window at a landscape rolling past like the pages of a never-ending book. Towns appear and disappear before you can learn their names. Strange rivers, hills, and lonely trees slip by like they're whispering stories you'll never fully hear. And those little stations along the way, why, they feel like bookmarks in a tale only the train itself knows how to read. There's a kind of magic in riding the rails, something no airplane or rickety bus could ever give you. Maybe it's the steady rhythm of the journey, the way the train rocks you into a dream you don't quite wake up from. Or maybe it's the way the world outside the window looks, so familiar yet so strange, like a half-remembered tune from childhood. Whatever it is, once you've tasted it, you'll never quite shake it loose. A train journey ain't just about going places, it's about finding pieces of yourself you didn't even know were missing. And when the trip is over, when you finally step off onto solid ground, don't be surprised if a part of you stays behind, rattling along the tracks, bound for somewhere just beyond the horizon. Ahmedwal, a station swallowed by time. Now, I ain't saying Ahmedwal is the loneliest, dustiest little station on God's green earth, but if there's one that can outdo it, I'd sure like to see it. Sitting a good 179 kilometers west of Quetta, it's the kind of place where the wind don't just whistle, it downright moans like an old mule caught in a fence. They say a railway station is where folks come and go, where lives cross like tangled fishing lines. Well, Ahmedwal is no different, except maybe half the folks passing through look like they stepped right out of an old photograph, and the other half seem like they got lost on their way to somewhere more important. Back in the 1940s, my uncle was the station master here. That meant he had himself a fine little office with a tall ceiling, a wooden desk that creaked louder than an old lady's knees, and a grand old clock on the wall that ticked away like it was keeping secrets. Out in the yard stood the signal arms, stiff and solemn, like an old soldier standing guard. Sometimes they pointed up, sometimes down, mostly depending on whether a train was coming or if the wind was feeling mischievous that day. My mother used to tell stories about Ahmedwal, the kind of tales that got lost in the steam rising off the tracks, the kind that travelers packed away with their luggage but never quite managed to unpack at the other end. The afternoons were hot enough to fry an egg on the rails, and barefoot kids ran around like the ground was made of live coals. Those train tracks weren't just metal and wood to them, they were a gateway to some grand, mysterious world, where every passing train was a glimpse into places they could only dream about. And when a train did come chugging along, puffing smoke and hollering like a preacher on Sunday, Ahmedwal woke right up. Tonga drivers yanked their horses into place, the tea vendors' samosas suddenly smelled twice as good, and some old fellow who'd been dozing under a bundle of rags would jerk upright, looking around like he'd just remembered where he was. The moment the train screeched to a stop, doors banged open, trunks and bundles spilled out, and the platform turned into a regular carnival of shouting, shoving, and last-minute deals. Some passengers leaped off and made a beeline for the water taps, while others just sat there in the window, eyes searching for a face they hoped to see but probably wouldn't. And that wind, oh, that wind. It came sweeping down from the mountains, carrying the kind of lonesome tune that could make a man homesick for a place he'd never been. When night fell and the station lights flickered in the dust, it felt like someone had just whispered a secret to the air and walked off without looking back. They say railway stations are crossroads of fate, where one man waves goodbye forever, and another steps off with hope in his eyes. Ahmedwal was just like that, quiet one moment, a madhouse the next. And that's why it ain't just a station. It's a story, a memory, a piece of time that rewrites itself every time a train rolls through. Even the great writer Salman Rushdie couldn't resist this stretch of track. He wrote about his journey to Dalbandin, calling it Pilgrimage to Dalbandine. His father worked there back in 1943 as an assistant engineer. Now, I don't know if Dalbandine is a place of pilgrimage, but if every traveler who gets there feels like they've arrived at some kind of holy ground, well, maybe the desert's got a way of making a man believe in things. The train that wouldn't stay gone. Way back till 2007, old number 403 up 404 down puffed along from Quetta to Zahedan, like clockwork, on the 1st and 15th of every month. It rattled through a land where time had all but dozed off, snaking past mountains that had seen more years than they cared to count. But then, as fate would have it, trouble came knocking. Law and order packed their bags and left town, and under General Pervez Musharraf's watch, the train was put out to pasture. It felt like a story half-told, like a tune cut short just before the final note. Even the mountains seemed to miss the sound of its whistle, like an old dog waiting at the door for a master who wasn't coming home. But let me tell you something about stories, they don't take kindly to being shut up in a dusty old drawer. Before long, the train was back, sporting a fresh coat of paint and a brand new name, Zahedan Mixed Passenger. And wouldn't you know it, she still rolls along to this day, dragging the ghosts of yesterday and the daydreams of tomorrow right along with her. She chugs through those same 730 kilometers, taking her sweet time, 33 hours and 10 minutes to be exact, stopping at 22 places where folks still come out to watch her pass. And if you've got 3,800 rupees jingling in your pocket, well, sir, you've got yourself a ticket. But let me tell you something, money ain't the real price of this journey. No, sir. The real price is paid in the hush that falls over a man when he steps aboard, in the way the land on either side of the border stitches itself together with every mile. It's in that moment when the engine groans, the wheels grip the rails, and some poor soul staring out the window feels a tug deep in his chest, like he just woke up from a dream he ain't quite ready to leave.